Assalamu alaikum to everybody, and welcome to the Emmoa Foundation Book Club. Today we're reviewing the book One Breath at a Time, Finding Solace in Faith by Salatu Sule. This book offers faith-inspired insights about grief and how to build resilience one breath at a time. We're very, very honored to have with us today the author of the book, Salatu E. Sule. Salatu E. Sule is a lawyer who transitioned into education in 2003. She's a coach, an international speaker, a trainer in faith-based personal development. She's director of training and development at the New Horizons College in Minna, Niger State, Nigeria. She's the trainer at the Dawa Institute on Islamic Education Trust and also director at the Aisha Lemu Learning Initiative. Welcome, Sister Salatu. I believe she has joined. Sister Salatu.
Yes, I'm here.
Assalamu alaikum. A hearty welcome.
Salatu.
Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Alhamdulillah.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We really appreciate you being here.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Sister Salatu, let me start by just quoting something from the back of your book, which is that you write, when a loved one dies, our world shifts, the pain rises up front and center of our minds, blocking out a lot of what we know and understand. Realizing and coping with the shock and trauma is never an easy task. Now, this is obviously a very challenging experience for anybody. So my first question for you would be, why did you decide to write this book? What guided your decision to write this book?
Okay. Sorry, just a quick. Okay, sorry, there was a slight glitch I needed to sort out. What guided the decision? I would say the book wasn't the first thing on my mind, obviously. When my husband passed away, as that section you quoted clearly shows, there were a lot of things that I was trying to. Of my way of dealing with it was to try to write about it. So the first time I started writing was really more to process what I was dealing with, my own thoughts. So it was really just personal writing going on there. Then there were times when I would have to speak, I had to speak with someone who was bereaved. Maybe when we would go for a condolence visit, or we would get talking and the person would mention what they were dealing with, and I would say a few things. Each time I did, it seemed to really make a big difference, which then reminded me that that was one of the things that helped me in the first few hours and the first few days after my late husband passed. It was actually listening to other people say something about their experience. They didn't have to tell the whole story, but just say something about what they were dealing with. And I found that was helpful, and seeing the same effect on people reminded me that this helped me. So how, obviously talking about it every time was emotionally demanding and draining. And even if I found the energy to do, how many people I could speak to, because sometimes it's only in accidental ways that you find out what someone is dealing with. You would meet somebody, they are smiling, they are happy, they look fine. As the conversation rolls and one thing leads to another, then they expose something of their pain. So there were those people I knew I could never really talk to because I didn't know they needed to hear anything. Therefore, I just went back to what I do naturally, almost compulsively, if you like. I decided to write about it. If it's written, it's in a book, then it can travel far. It can reach many more people who don't know that they needed to hear those words. And I didn't have to be there to say it. It was really more to just, as we say, give somebody a companion when they really need one.
Yes, no, clearly. I mean, that's very brave, and also a lot of empathy involved in that. I also wanted to ask you something that I was reflecting on. I mean, I must honestly say that I found the book, mashallah, very impactful. There were some times when I had to put it down and take a few breaths, It was it's a heavy book. I mean, the length is not it's not a voluminous book. It's a very nice, concise book, but it's very deep. It's very strong. Alhamdulillah. And but one of the things that struck me is the honesty, alhamdulillah, and the authenticity and the directness, which sometimes can be tough, you know, to take. But that brings me to my next question, which is, why do you think it's important to be honest about how you're feeling during this grieving process that people go through?
The honesty there is honesty with oneself, primarily. Why that's important is, if somebody is grieving, like I said, there's a jollof, if you like, of emotions you're dealing with. You can't deal with something you're not looking at. Naturally, when one is faced with adversity, especially that deep kind, there's the instinct to pull away, to turn away, to run away from it, to deny it. It's natural. It's part of the process. However, one cannot outrun it. One can't just, you know, cancel it. You can't put a lid on it and say, there, it's done. The grief. Therefore, if one is to actually deal with it, then you have to sort of sit with it and look at it honestly and say, this is what I'm feeling, and say it to yourself, because sometimes yourself needs to hear it. Somebody else can try to say it for you, but as we all know, if we've ever had to deal with pain, there's a part of your pain that nobody else can speak to for you. You have to be the one saying it to yourself. I sometimes liken grief, whether it's grief over the death of a loved one, whether it's grief over loss of something you really value, a home or a relationship, whatever it is, as long as you're grieving. I liken that grief to some visitor that you didn't invite, you don't want, that walks into your house and sits down. Now you can run and lock yourself in a bedroom and pretend the guest is in there, but the guest is there. And each time you go out, the guest is going to be there. And the only way to deal with it is to sit with it and look at it and acknowledge that this is what it is. When you start doing that, then you really start feeling you can move forward with it. Another reason why that honesty is important is that grief comes in layers or corners. Someone, a loved one passes away, and everybody says, oh, you are feeling bad because the loved one is no longer with you. You are missing the person. I would say that's one layer. For somebody, let's say in the family, in the circle, in the group of people who are grieving this person, somebody else might also be feeling disappointed, in addition to the pain of missing the person, because there was something that this person was supposed to do with them or for them, and it's no longer going to happen. So there's a layer of disappointment. Somebody else might have a layer of anger because there's some unresolved conflict, some quarrel that they had and they couldn't sort it out. Then the person passed away. So there's the unresolved conflict and its own pain. Then there's the wish that, you know, the conflict hadn't happened at that time, just before the person passed. So you get these many layers. If one isn't honest with one's.
Sorry, Sister Salatu,
we might just stop at, oh, I'm missing the person.
We just missed the
sorry?
We just missed the last couple of seconds because you were cutting out a little bit from time to time. So you said if one isn't honest about.
If you're not honest about what exactly is causing my pain, then you might not even realize that there are these layers to pain. So you do the usual, maybe crying and talking about the person and, oh, I miss them. But the pain remains and you keep saying, why does it keep coming back? But that's because there are unresolved aspects of the pain that you haven't even recognized because you didn't slow down to look inside yourself honestly and say, why am I in pain? What's causing this? For example, if I use a personal experience, the day my late husband passed away, just before he traveled, I saw him. I mean, we worked in the same place. So we went to the school together. We worked in the secondary school where I am now. We went there together. We drove in the same car. And then later on, I went to the administrative block to do something. And I saw him at the end of the corridor. And the thought just popped in my head, go over and just say hello, you know, the way you see a loved one and you just pop over and say, hey, how are you doing? And then I saw he was busy speaking with some students and I said, with students. Well, we'll see later. We already said our goodbyes anyway. I'll talk to him on the phone. And then I went back to my office. And the next time we spoke was over the phone. And he wanted to know something about our son's open day, because I went for the open day that morning. And I said, don't worry, we'll talk about it when you come back, inshallah, on Sunday. This was on a Friday. So after he passed, it took a while for me to realize those two things just kept running around in my head. They were another layer of the pain. I wish I had gone and spoken to him. I wish I had taken the time to just tell him about our son's open day. So when one is honest, then one arrives at those places and you see the layers and you can start processing them and dealing with them, inshallah.
That's interesting that there's not just the there isn't just the grief and expressing the grief through, you know, tears and pain and processing that, but also actual layers of what triggers, you know, what are the things that are bothering one, and being very honest about them. And I mean, I'm wondering what you do with that information when you identify that, okay, there's a natural grieving process, you know, that human beings have. It's a natural emotion when they lose a loved one. It's just one of the most natural things. But what do you do about the things that you wish, the phone call you wish you had made? We've all been in that situation with the best friend that passed, and you kept saying, I'm going to call, and then you get a call to say they've passed, and you're just like, you know. So what do you do with that information where you wish you had done something, but you didn't? You know, what do we do with that?
Okay. Well, I would suggest several things. It depends on what the information is that you come up with and what stage you are at with your own self. One thing you could do with the emotion or with that information when you get that is say, okay, you can't do anything. You can't go back in time. That's given. And that in itself is part of the pain. The fact that you can't go back and you keep wanting to go back and fix that. So instead you focus on going forward. The example you gave is it's a great one. A friend who you kept saying, I'll call, and the next thing you hear, they've passed away. And you say, I wish I had called when I felt like calling. So you then say to yourself, going forward, I will call my friends more regularly. Going forward, I will call family more. If I hear a friend is ill, going forward, I will call to say, how are you doing? Just the way I wanted to do with that friend. So there's no going forward with it. There's no going forward with it. Like the example I gave, there's no going forward with, oh, every time I'm asked about the children's open day, I'll tell. There's no going forward. So instead, that is acceptance that it's done. You didn't know that that would be the last time you'd see the person. You didn't know that would be your last conversation. And what you didn't do wasn't some sin of omission. It was a natural thing to do in the moment. So stop blaming yourself. Stop, obsessing about it. Let it go. It's done. Yeah, those are two things one could do. Another thing I know that one could do is when it's something really painful, you then turn it into dua. You turn it into a prayer. Like if it's a case of where passed away and the conflict wasn't resolved. If on your own part, during that moment of conflict, you felt aggrieved, you felt hurt, you never said, I forgive you. You never said, it's okay, it's fine, let's let it go. You can say it aloud now. You can put it in dua. You can talk to Allah about it and say, Allah, I've forgiven this person. It's over, it's done. If you feel that you were the one who did something wrong and you never got to apologize for it, then you say it again in prayer. Because there's a beautiful thing that I read from the hadith that those who've passed about us. So you hope the person knows that you have let it go, that it's done. If it's some offense that you're hanging on to, you tell Allah, Allah, let it go. It's done. Don't punish the person for this. I have forgiven. So there are different ways one could put that in for when you find it. And then there are times when you just let it be. You just say, I'm hurting because of this. There's this layer of pain. Say, okay, I'm in pain. Fine. Just be. You don't have to even do anything about it. Inshallah, other things will come and dilute the pain.
Inshallah. I think what's reassuring for us is also from an Islamic perspective, we know that grief and pain and tears are just is a natural expression of losing a loved one. I mean, we have the the story of the Prophet, peace be upon him, upon losing his son Ibrahim alayhi salam, and shed tears, and the Sahaba were very surprised, and he was, he let them know that this is also rahmah from Allah. This is showing rahmah. It's showing us that the tears and the pain is so natural. It's what you do with the tears and the pain. It's obviously accepting Allah's decree, making you closer to Allah, making dua, thinking of the person, and reminding them if you're there at the time of Allah, reciting Quran, doing sadaqah for them. So really almost taking the focus, accepting your pain and grief, but almost learning from it positively and taking the focus away from yourself and thinking, what can I do to even help that person in the grave? What can I even do to, to help that person and others, which is really, really quite, it's very soothing to know that in the Islamic tradition, we have this kind of always model of how to deal with this. Not that it's bottled up and you can't express it or anything, but it's actually, this is very natural. It's just that it has to be done in a particular way. The other question I will ask is this, is if we speak about the title of your book, why did you call it One Breath at a Time, Finding Solace in Faith? What was the significance of the title?
Okay. The significance is the fact that it has something to do with breathing, because one of the memories that I still have very vividly is shortly after I received the news that my late husband had passed away. What I know I felt physically was real, like, constriction of the chest. Like, I couldn't breathe. I still vividly remember trying hard to breathe. At a point, I just felt I couldn't breathe. So I kept taking deep breaths again and again and again until I could get that under control. And time after time, I would come back to that point where I would feel like I was being suffocated, and I would have to just take really deep breaths to get everything under control. And I often found it soothing. So it became sort of a habit. So it wasn't surprising for me when later on I read about how you take deep breaths, you pace your breathing, and it does calm down, your mind calms down, even your physiological senses, your heart rate, and all of that. And I thought, okay, that's what was happening when I would take those deep breaths. So when writing the book, at first I had no title for it. At a point, I then thought about that and said, okay, something to do with the breath. So at first I called it Breathe. And then later on, I thought that might be hard for people to pronounce, and the usual, more the functional side. So what do you call this book? The symbolism is slow. Don't rush anything. You can't rush grief. So is it one step at a time, or breathe one step at a time? And then it came together, one breath at a time. Interestingly, so many other people use that title as well, one breath at a time. But that's the only way, for me, I would say that's the only way to get through anything really difficult. One breath at a time. Breathe in, hold it, breathe out. Breathe in, out.
Well, that makes perfect sense. I suppose the reality is that what we have is that each breath, that is even also what we even have in reality as human beings. What we have is each breath. We're not guaranteed another breath. It's what make you the most of each breath. So that's a very apt title to the book. So Salatu, how would you say we deal or respond to death and grief as a culture and as a community, from your experience? How do you think we deal with it?
Okay. That question reminds me of something I witnessed once. I've witnessed it in different ways, but this one struck me because a lady's husband passed away suddenly. He was perfectly healthy and suddenly passed away. So we went to the house to condole. As you think, African culture and many other cultures, the place was filled with relatives, neighbors, friends, colleagues. It was packed. So we were there, and as we got there, she was seated in the sitting room, surrounded by family members. We were just colleagues, so we greeted her, then we sat towards the back. Then a woman came in. The woman, from the way she was acting and speaking, she was very familiar. So perhaps she was a family member or a family friend. And then as the woman whose husband had died began to cry, she was crying audibly. She wasn't speaking, she wasn't shouting, but she was just weeping audibly, the way people do when they cry. And this other elderly lady went over to her and said, no, 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 don't cry, don't cry. Don't you know they'll punish him in the grave? You shouldn't cry, you mustn't cry. And I sat there thinking, what? She shouldn't cry? Like, I wanted to say something, but I thought, let me just hold my peace. This is family here, and I'm the outsider. So I sat there thinking, how do you tell somebody not to cry when they've just received this news? Is this the understanding of the hadith? Because like the hadith you just quoted, the Prophet, peace be upon him, shed tears, and he even spoke. The only thing he said was, mind what you say. And he actually said that he would only say what pleases Allah. In another instance, when his son died, he actually said, my heart is sinking. He used those words, my heart is sinking, my eyes are shedding tears, but I will only say what pleases Allah. And he said, I am grieved, Ibrahim, at parting from you. So he spoke of his pain. And where do we get this idea? Don't cry, don't utter a sound, don't say a word. But this is what this person was telling a woman whose husband had just died. So I sat there, just biting my tongue. Then maybe a few minutes later, I heard someone else crying loudly. And I turned to see, who is this person? We've been sitting here for a while. Did the person just get hit by a wave of grief again? And it was the very woman who was saying, don't cry, don't cry, don't say a word. And I thought, so you know that pain can express itself this way. Why I'm sharing those stories, I've seen many cases where somebody is really grieving deeply and they're told not to cry. And I call that locking it in and bottling it up. It's not healthy. It's not healthy. Another thing that I know as a culture we need to also talk about is how we burden the people who are grieving more than we should. It stems from good intentions, where they say, go keep them company. Don't let them sit all by themselves. When they're alone, they think more. But when we go, then you see people sitting, spending the whole day doing nothing except talking, gisting about football, politics, what happened in the other house, what happened the other day. They're on calls, they are on their phones. They are not really adding value, but they're sitting throughout and then they're eating. They expect to be fed. I don't know what happens in other cultures, but I see that a lot here. They sit there, expect to be fed breakfast, lunch, and dinner by the people who are grieving. Whereas the Islamic culture says, you take food to them. That's the recommendation. You take food to those who are grieving. You go to relieve them. If you keep them company, keep them. So we have some of these issues. In some cultures, they expect people to grieve loudly, to wail, to shout and say things like, my own is finished. Without you, what would I do? To roll on the floor, to walk and forlorn forever. There are so many burdens that are put on people who are grieving that we should be mindful of this. So as a culture, we have positive aspects of our culture, like keep company with the bereaved, say good words to them, encourage them, remind them of Allah. There are these positive things, both from the Islamic culture and the cultural and the traditional side. Then we have those aspects that we need to be more mindful of. These are the things I think I would love to add. Thank you.
I think those will be very useful, people knowing how they can approach and communicate that to people. It's without feeling, oh my goodness, this is our culture. We have to, when you're grieving, you have to start cooking and host. Most people can't even eat when they're grieving. They can't sleep. So it's about, please take them some food so they can help encourage them to eat. So they don't lose their energy, and help them with the school run. I suppose people are always worried about what people will think, and I suppose it's about helping people to communicate that message and reinforce the fact that this is really the Sunnah, this is the Islamic tradition. Don't fall into, culture is okay as long as it's aligned with the Islamic tradition, but to enable people, facilitating and supporting people and having the courage to do what's best, inshallah, that's an educational thing. What has been the response of your readers so far? From the book so far. I know I've seen some of the Instagram posts on the publisher's page, which I may share. Let me just see if I can share my screen and we can possibly talk through what some of the readers' responses, and maybe you can also talk through. I'm just having a look if I can. Stop. Okay. Oh, stop this share. 1 second. Let me see if I can share. Perhaps you can, okay, I think this was, okay, there we go. Oh, it's the wrong one. Apologies. For some reason, it is not coming up.
Okay, I can see something. I can see, I just saw it.
Yeah, I think, but it's a wrong screen coming up. I mean, I do have it up here, but for some reason it's the wrong,
okay.
The reader's reviews, but it's, for some reason it's not coming up.
Okay.
If it will come again, but maybe you can talk us through. I mean, I've got some things printed out, so maybe I can even just read from it. But yeah, I read the publisher's page, and I found it quite poignant. You know what people were saying about it. It's somebody wrote on the publisher's page. Little did I know when I received this small book, less than 100 pages, that it would provide me with the biggest support. Some of you may already know that one of my parents has been ill for quite some time, and unfortunately it's gotten really bad. And then I jumped to where they say, it said, through one breath at a time, I was given an idea of processing grief as a Muslim and finding peace of mind through faith. Despite reading about the hereafter and knowing ultimately we all go back to our Creator, we can't really stop ourselves from feeling these emotions of loss, despair, and sadness. They're all legitimate because we lose a precious landmark, as Salatu Sule puts it. Salatu Sule shares her own experience, overcome by grief, drawing her strength mainly from Allah's words. God does not place on anyone, any soul, a burden except what it can bear. Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 286. But she also explains how active she was in redesigning her mental landscape, my favorite chapter. I'm extremely grateful to Salatu Sule for sharing her own experience, and I couldn't recommend this book, however, whenever hard times hit you. I thought that was a very honest response to that. And then what's your experience been so far?
I'd say the response has made me feel that the decision to write the book was the right one. That's one thing for sure. Because even though I decided I would write it, but actually sitting down to try and remember and then try to express in words something that's very hard to express, even casually, was difficult. And it took me years to get through to say, okay, I'm done writing it. I remember even when I said I'm done, I let it sit for a year. And finally, after a full year, I said, okay, I think I have enough emotional energy to go back to this book and try again. And then I let it sit for another year before I finally said, listen, send this book out. You had an intention, you had a reason, so get it done, get it out there. There are people who have communicated with me after reading the book that I know I would never have had the chance to sit with or to speak with. So it made me feel the decision to write it was the good one. It has reached the kind of audience I wanted it to reach, those who need to hear it. And what the book helped people with is not what I envisaged. I just imagined loss, but not even the fear of loss, not even people saying the book helps them understand how to, deal with or communicate with someone who's grieving. So it's done far more than I expected. The comment about the size of the book you just read was another thing I didn't see coming. Many people would mention about how small it is, yet how helpful it's been, or how the fact that it was so small allowed them to get through from cover to cover, and they were glad of the size and what was inside of it. It took me back to when I finished writing, and it seemed the standards, the industry standard is, if it's a book, it has to be about, I can't remember, but it has to be a nice thick thing. And I saw that everywhere I checked online, and even the publishers, they said, that's the standard. And I remember saying to my husband that I don't want to add any more words. I've said all I want to say now. Yes, there's more I could say, but I don't want to say them. I've said all I need to say. And he said, then it's fine, that's it. I shared this aspect because I said what I wanted to say and I let it be. It reminded me that even when I was grieving, there were people, but just by sitting with me and being silent with me was comforting in and of itself. I remember three actually, who did that. They just sat with me for hours, saying nothing. except I might sometimes see them doing adhkar or their lips moving, maybe dua. But that was it. That sometimes to support someone who's grieving, who's hurting, you don't have to say anything. You just have to say the first few words to acknowledge that you know what they're dealing with, and your silence sometimes is sufficient. And sometimes you need just a few words of encouragement, prayer. It's sufficient. We don't have to fill the airspace with words to help, to support. Sometimes you're in such pain that you don't even want words. The words begin to grate on your nerves, that there are times the silence is okay. Yeah.
It's actually very helpful for people to know as well that that's another approach. Just presence and company and silence is also comforting, you know. Sometimes one always feels that one has to be actively doing something, saying something, you know, but just presence itself is something and silence is something. Before we move on, I just wanted to read a couple more comments from readers on the publisher's page. The lady that writes, life is not always easy. We face challenges, difficulties, and hardship through life. These highs and lows are part of life. Sometimes, however, we need that reminder that Allah is always there, and these moments of hardship are not punishments, but trials from Him to strengthen us, guide us, elevate us, one breath at a time. And then she carries on and says, even though I haven't experienced the loss of a loved one, I was truly humbled by reading her book. Her words were so simple yet so powerful and soothing. Salatu E includes many verses from the Holy Quran and Hadith that helped her through this journey of grief. The book offers faith-inspired insights about grief and how to build resilience. And the last comment was, it's breath at a time, maybe a teeny tiny thing, but it sure does pack a punch, which I think is a great thing to say.
Yeah.
A book about coping with grief and adversity. You might think you don't need this book because you never lost a loved one or been through a divorce or suffered a life-changing illness, etc. But we all go through testing times and we all try to cope with life's happenings however we can. This book shows you how to draw on faith for strength, and I particularly enjoyed the author's references to Quranic verses at certain times in her life. It's clear she's built a relationship with it to connect so powerfully, with Allah to connect so powerfully. We need to be able to do that. You know, I think it's very reassuring to hear people's comments because it just reinforces the usefulness of dealing with this and having a process, and the fact that it is challenging, but also, you know, seeking comfort in Allah, seeking comfort in the Islamic tradition helps, and also helping others in a practical way know how they can support people. Language and terms are so important in identifying and processing our emotions. You know, the power of words. You know. We know that even in the Islamic tradition, in the Quran, it's all about words and power and language. We have that even in our Islamic tradition. I'd quite like you to read from the chapter on words and labels on page 42, if you would, and give us some insights into this.
Okay, thank you. Words and labels. As the months went by, I tried to mind what was going on in my head. As I've mentioned above, some days were extremely tough. I had to constantly check my mind, gauge its state so that I could care for it. I avoided taking on any labels that weighed me down. So, to me, I wasn't a widow. I was a woman whose husband had died. He had died. My son wasn't an orphan. He was a boy whose father had died. I wasn't a woman who lost her husband and son within a short space of time. I was simply me. This might sound like so-called denial, but it was really me choosing to describe my circumstances in plain language which didn't bear widow, orphan, and loss were words which alluded to vulnerability, and they made me feel sorry for myself. I was sad enough. I didn't want to focus on the sadness. We choose and the words with which we construct the narratives are important when we are trying to breathe through pain. I wrote this part because I know in my head I started thinking, so I'm now a widow. And each time I thought that, I actually felt my heart drop. I could feel a weight suddenly, like it was sitting on me. you know, you hear about it, we're helping, supporting widows and orphans. People say, oh, you need to help her, she's a widow. It's not as if it's an insult. It's not even derogatory. Sometimes it's actually what one needs to say. It's just I was conscious of how it was making me feel. I didn't like the sense of helplessness that came with it. I didn't like how each time I thought about it and thought, oh, my son is now fatherless. It just So I said, you know what, I need to stop using these terms for myself. I needed to stop. So I had to say, then what do I say? I say what happened? He died. That plainness actually helped me, I think, face it and deal with it. So it wasn't about what comes with being a widow, what comes with being an orphan. It was, here is an event, a painful one. It made me grieve. I was grieving, and that's what it was. You know how in African and some other cultures, when you have a child, when you give birth to a child, you shift from being Salatu Aziza, you become mother of such and such, mama so and so, this, iya so and so. And because that's a positive thing, it's a label you would wear with pride. And each time someone calls you mother of so and so, they are reminding you of this beautiful being that you birthed. They are reminding you of something you love. They are reminding you of something you really, really wanted and you got. So when you have that label, it's fine. It's cool. It's great. So imagine when the label is something that reminds you every time of the event. It's like wearing the event. That's how it felt to me. Like I'm going to keep wearing the death of my husband and walking around with it. And I didn't want that. Somebody might say, no, that wouldn't work for me. That's for him or her. But it's fine. I remember a friend who is a cancer survivor, and she also expressed something similar, how she didn't want to be just the cancer survivor. She didn't want to keep wearing her cancer, so to speak. And she said she's more than the person who survived cancer. So there were times when she wouldn't want to talk about the cancer. She wouldn't want to go to an event about it, because at those moments, I feel she wanted to just be more all that she was beyond the cancer. I feel we should help people not just be the sad event. And again, here I said, this isn't just about grieving someone who's died. Even people who are rape survivors, there are times I know they don't want to be reminded of the rape. They want something more. They are more than that. We are a package, a full package, and I didn't want to give myself a title that wasn't helping me heal.
I think that's really important, actually, because I don't think people realize the impact of the words. It's not intentional, and they don't realize, but it can be disempowering, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's a good consciousness to raise about all issues. You know, how people label things, what people say, and how it has an impact in the way people now start to see themselves. Maybe with children, how you bring them up, what you say to them, you know. So I think it's very important to raise the consciousness about it. So I'm not sure people would actually be aware of that. And also a reductionist attitude towards things in general. People, it's easier to be reductionist somehow. Life is like, but life is so nuanced and so complex, and people are human beings, and they're whole human beings, and they have many different facets to their lives, their personalities, their experiences. They're not defined by one thing, you know? They're encouraging people to just have that kind of broader, more nuanced approach to everything, actually, you know. Alhamdulillah, it's a very valid but very powerful chapter. I love that chapter, mashallah. And then I'd like you to talk us through, if you can, your insights from the chapters on why does it hurt so much, and then the other chapter on understanding the pain. If you can talk us through the insights on those two chapters.
Yeah. I'll just combine both, really. Why does it hurt so much? That's a question that a few people have actually asked me directly. And oddly enough, before I had any of these experiences, I had a student who lost her father, her mother, I think. No, sorry, her mother, her stepmother in a car accident. And then not long after, her grandfather and her brother. I think it was all within the space of a month or 2 months. She was young. She was about maybe 13 or 14 at the time. I did the best I could to counsel her, and she seemed fine. Then some months later, she came to me and said, that she couldn't understand why she would suddenly be in pain all over again. And she kept saying she didn't know why. Then I used more common sense, logic, not experience. And what I said to her then is part of what I'll share now, which is what I then reminded myself of. And I asked her, I said, how long have you known your mom? And she said, since birth. I said, literally since birth, so about 14 years. From the moment you became conscious of being, you knew this woman. And your brother and your grandfather. I said, so how long do you think it would take to erase the emotions and the memories until they are so faded, you don't feel the pain anymore? And she nodded her head like, okay, I get it now. So I reminded myself, and that's what I'm sharing now, that why does it hurt so much? It depends on how much you value what you had. So if it's someone who, let's say, has an illness that affects their mobility, how much did you value being the person who could move around whenever you wanted to and go where you wanted and do your stuff? How much did you value that? If it's a business that crashed, how much did you value the business? How many dreams and hopes did you have? What was your vision for that business? How much you value a thing is, I'm not a mathematician, but I think if I say it's directly proportional to the pain when you don't have it, I would be correct. So why does it hurt so much? Because you love that person that much, because you value that thing that much, you value that relationship that much. You had a lot of hope there. So that's the first part of that. Why does it hurt so much? It's that. Another part of it that came to me when I was thinking about it and reading what people had to say as well was, if we don't have long memories, then we wouldn't hurt so much. If I forget by tomorrow that I ever had a husband or I ever had a child who died at birth, I wouldn't hurt at all. I'd be fine. But as human beings, the way we are constructed, the way we live, we call ourselves the higher animals, right? We are super intelligent. We've got these long memories. We store things. We link them in our heads. We package them all nicely. That also comes at a cost. The cost is when something is out of place. We remember. We keep remembering, we are reminded, and then the pain comes. Sometimes the pain you're feeling today is not the pain of the first day alone, it's the pain of the first day and the second day and the third day and the other time when this happened and you were reminded of the first and the second and the third day. So it just builds up. That's also part of why it hurts that much. And understanding the pain is understanding the layers. It's understanding that. It's understanding that we don't ever actually outgrow the pain. We carry it along, and then we let life and time dilute or fill our own space so much that the pain is diluted. I think that's a way I would describe it. The pain is diluted. So we understand that. Then sometimes something could happen that acts like a hook, and it just hooks into the pain and it brings it up to the surface again. And then you feel the burst of pain again. Sometimes it's something major, at times it's something really minor. But understanding that also helps us move forward, because I know personally I was afraid of going beyond day one because I didn't know how I was going to deal with day two, especially when a few hours later, I realized it's only been a few hours. And I thought, my God, it's only been a few hours. And I'm still feeling like this. I thought, how am I supposed to live the next day, the next month? Going forward was scary. But understanding the pain and seeing it, as we mentioned earlier, as something that doesn't have to drag you down, but you can do something more with it. Some would say, let your pain push you forward. Let your pain inspire you. Learning what can I do with this pain is also helpful. I remember a friend of mine who died last year. She died from cancer. She was a cancer, I would say, survivor for years. She said that one of the things that happened was there was a particular day she got this sharp pain in her spine. The cancer had spread. And she said that pain was so sharp. She was on her way from the hospital, even in the car. Her parents were driving, that she just wanted them to stop the car so she could get out of the car. And she said she wanted to get out. She didn't know where she could go to, but it was like, get out of the pain. And then she thought to herself that this pain would, fade. And she said, what would eternity be like if one is in pain? And she said that was what also reminded her, do what you can with the life you've got. Prepare that home. Let your pain remind you that it could be worse. So understanding the pain helps us live with it. It's like understanding a neighbor that you don't really like, but you have to live in that place, So yeah, this is some of the thoughts in my head.
Thank you very much for that. We've got quite a lot of questions and comments, so I think before I get on to a couple of other questions, I think I'd just like to take questions from the chat and comments that people have. People have posted links to the where you can access the book. Thank you so much, Zakla Hair, for that. Somebody has commented also shedding emotional tears releases oxytocin and endorphins, which makes people feel good, and may also ease physical and emotional pain. Actually, doctors often say that they don't actually worry so much about the patients they see crying and grieving. It's the ones that bottle it up that they worry about, because they feel that that's going to take a lot longer and actually may manifest itself in something else. Somebody's saying, well said, we don't always need to fill the space with talking. Just being present and offering the space is enough. And Sister Yetunde is saying, SubhanAllah, words are powerful. Using the exact words can be helpful. Appreciate your openness about that. And then somebody's also commenting, you will be as what you see yourself as. That's very interesting. Another comment again, I like that perspective. Choose the word and label that allows you to be you. We are more than just what happened to us. And then there's a question here from Sister Yetunde, and perhaps you can help us with this. It is saying, placing a label, ? Is it true we must first place a label to enable us to deal with the sad events? So Salatu, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, not necessarily. You don't have to. If it's helpful to you in particular, to the person who's grieving, then you should. If it's not helpful, then you shouldn't, because we grieve differently. Two people may lose someone that they're related to in the same way. So two siblings might lose their mother, but they would grieve very differently, because we are different human beings. The way we are wired, there are differences between one person and another, even twins, identical twins. So if it works for you to place the label, fine. If it doesn't, then don't. That's one thing I think I would love to keep underscoring, that there's something very personal about grief and pain and emotions, like so many other things connected to every human being. So you have to find what helps, what works. So I even say to people, if you read the whole book and you find nothing works, then nothing works, because I'm not you. Maybe I'm not speaking to your situation. Somebody else may read the whole book and find it one chapter that works. The rest, not really. Someone might say every chapter worked for me. So it's what works for you. That's what it is. And even when I say, okay, you don't need to speak, somebody else might say, oh no, I want people to chat. I want them to talk about politics and football, everything except what's going on with me. Somebody else might actually want to fill the space with words and chatter. So people are different like that.
Okay. I've been going back to the book, in your chapter entitled Redesigning My Mental Landscape, you talk about life moving on and having to move with it. The fact that life just moves on and you kind of have to move with it. That's one thing. Life will move on and change one's mental landscape. Can you speak to those currently dealing with grief with regards to this process, with regards to the moving on, redesigning the landscape, and just some insights into that?
Okay. There is a time definitely for, like I said, being still, not doing much, not doing anything. There is a time for that. And I think everyone who's dealing with some challenge has to find the space and the time to do that. Do only the barest minimum, if that's what you can handle at that time. Like the things you have to do every day: eat, sleep, pray, if someone who has kids, drop them off in school, do some administrative stuff. But there is a time when you have to say, okay, I need to really move forward with my life. And when does that time? Or the other, it's different, but usually you would feel the push within yourself. You'll feel the readiness to try to move forward. Now, when some of us readily try to move forward, we try to move forward and put things back exactly as they were before the event. So if it's someone who, because of some illness, was out of work for a full year, perhaps, or months, when they come back to the office, they expect things to be exactly as it was before they left, whereas things would have shifted and happened in your absence. That's when sometimes the depression comes back, the sadness comes back, because you start feeling out of place, because mentally you are trying to put things back as they were. I used the term mental landscape because that's what it feels like, that inside our heads there's a way we set up our world. There's a way in which we recognize our world, we envision ourselves, we see ourselves, we visualize ourselves. This is who I am, these are the relationships that make me me, these are the things that make me me, they make my life complete. When you grieve about something or someone, one of those things that is part of your landscape, that gives your landscape its significance, is no longer there. The pain comes from trying to put it back. You keep wanting to talk to that person, you keep wanting to do it the way it was done before, 6 months ago, 1 year ago when you were there. You keep wanting to be the go-to person that you were before you fell critically ill and could no longer be the go-to person. Redesigning your mental landscape is acknowledging within yourself that these things have shifted, these things have moved, they have changed, and asking yourself, so what do I do differently now? If this job I used to do, I can no longer do it, what can I do now given the reality of my circumstance? It's looking again at your reality and saying, given my circumstances right now, not 5 months ago, not before my father died, before my husband died, before my wife died, not any of that, but right now, what can I do? What's working for me? What's going to work for me right now? If, let's say, there's someone who you always used to go to confide in and talk about your problems with, and that person passes away, you might shut down and say, well, no more, there's nobody else to confide in. But you can say, right now, who can I speak to? Some people would resort to speaking to the person, almost like imagining they are there and then talking to them. It is a coping mechanism and it works for some people, but it's a redesign because in a sense, you're acknowledging the person isn't here anymore, but I'm doing this in the meantime until I find the next step. It's a process that one can't even do overnight. It's something you can't do subconsciously. It's something you have to be deliberate about. You have to be intentional about and say, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to move forward, but in a way that I'm accepting reality as it is. Yeah.
That's very powerful. So you're saying in some way, this is the acceptance of reality, which is the current situation, and then seeing what can I do based on my current reality. That is not to say that I will not reflect on the past and it won't hurt, or I won't be reminiscent. You know, that those seep in. So I think some people also just try and block it and move, and then, you know, you have to kind of process also. You know, the two simultaneous things going on, aren't they? Yeah, and they all have their time, absolutely. Right?
Yes, you can't rush either one. Yeah. And sometimes, yes, as you said, they're simultaneous. While you're trying to also face this, you are also trying to rebuild. In fact, the very idea of rebuilding is acknowledging that something isn't there anymore. So they actually go together.
There's quite a few questions I'd like to, I think there's just something I would like to just point out quickly before I just go to questions, is that you also have to bear in mind your energy, your battery, you know, because sometimes I think people just do not have the battery power to deal with certain things at certain times. And they can break, you know. So I think also one has to be very realistic with your physiological, psychological states and what is possible, you know. I would just read some comments as well. Mrs. Balogun is saying, thank you so much, Salatu. Some labels like widow or orphan, while descriptive, can make someone look solely like a victim of that circumstance and not a human being beyond that. And somebody's saying, may Allah grant Iblis be forgiven and granted Jannat al-Firdaus, Ameen. Although I have not read the book One Breath at a Time, it reminds me of the book Don't Be Sad by Al-Karni. I think it's a helpful tool for sensitizing our communities. Thank you so much, brother. And then somebody's also saying, Rafia Yusuf is saying, there is a saying that when you can tell your story without crying, it means you've healed. Healing is a process which makes one strong. That's quite interesting as well. Thank you so much, brother. But I would add to that, though, for me, the crying is not a weakness. Crying, I think, is just human emotion, you know? I don't see crying as a weakness. I think you can have healed but still cry, you know?
Yes.
You can accept.
You may not have healed, but you're just not crying at the moment.
Exactly. You kind of not healed and then also not cry and come across as very strong. So I just feel like crying is just a natural emotion, just, you know, and then it says here, somebody else is also, but thank you very much for the comments also, alhamdulillah. Somebody's written that we have the golden hour in our family. It's an individual moment for each one, and it's breathing deeply, reflect, meditate. It's something that I introduce to young people and families to try out. When this becomes a practice and a culture, it makes coping about anything so much easier. Thank you so much, Nagiba. That's really quite, it'd be nice if you could comment a little bit more on that, because I think that's very useful in terms as a life approach to just breathing through things, because our breath is what we have. And Sheikh Nuruddin is commenting, according to those scholars who are doctors of the heart, the dryness of the eyes, Jumud al-Ain, refers to the inability to cry or shed tears, and is regarded by them as a symptom of a diseased heart. A healthy heart is able to cry. Someone else said, a tear a day keeps the psychiatrist away. Interesting, mashallah. Interesting. That's also the crying is also a release of, you know. And then Sister Binta is saying, where do you think the notion of a deceased person being punished when loved ones cry comes from? I've heard this so many times in various countries. How do we best share the stories from our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him, in a way that really helps our communities provide the right support and information to those grieving? Over to you, Sister Salatu.
Okay. The notion of the deceased being punished, I think probably, like, I've not actually asked those who say it. I've not had the chance to ask them directly, where does this come from? But I think probably it comes from a hadith, which I haven't had time to also look into myself, where it's reported that somebody passed away and the family members were then making certain comments like, this person is their provider, he's the one. I don't want to misquote the hadith, but the comments almost made it seem like they felt the person was their source of sustenance and life, in a sense. When they were saying that, it was then said the person was being questioned in the grave by the angels or in the afterlife, saying, is this what you are to them? Is this really what it is? That the person was being punished. Wallahu alam, I think those who understand hadith sciences more can talk about that hadith, its authenticity. But there's something I know for sure, that you can read a hadith or a verse of the Quran and read certain words, but you have to always say, so what do we understand from this? What might be the background to this? Let's assume that indeed someone who passes away could be punished for what people say about him or her, how they grieve, how they lament about the person. I know also for a fact that Islamically, Allah says repeatedly in the Quran, وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. The bearer of burden will not bear the burden of another. A statement which is clearly understood to always mean, I will not be punished for the actions of wrong actions of somebody else. I would only be held accountable for my actions. So if that be the case, if I am not the one who taught people that I'm their sustainer, I'm the one who's going to keep them living, if I die, they're done, why would I be punished? That's number one. Number two, if I'm already dead and I can't stop them from saying such things, why would I be punished? The only situation where I could possibly see someone being punished for what people say and how they grieve is if that's how I teach them to grieve. So now I've got kids, maybe that I tell them, make them think I'm I'm the one, Alpha and Omega, I'm everything. I provide for them. I don't teach them about Allah. I don't connect them with the truth. I let them go astray and wander off. If I pass away and they carry out certain actions, then I could say, yes, I would have a share in the liability for their wrong actions when I could have taught them better because I'm responsible for them as the mother. Other than that, I really don't understand how someone can be punished because people are saying XYZ about him or her when they are dead in their lamentation. Then again, if we go back to those hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, he was pretty clear. Say only what pleases Allah, so you can say stuff. If you're crying, there is nothing there. So we can't say the person who's in the grave will be punished if I'm crying. If that's what people are saying, I don't understand where that comes from, really. Wallahu alam. I think that's something to dig into further to understand where is it coming from. But if one looks at the general, what we call the general principles Islamically, the principles of justice, Allah's justice, he never punishes one person for the action of another, then I would say, simply speaking, the dead can be punished because just because I'm wailing and flinging myself on the floor and rolling about. No. Wallahu alam.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Salatu. There's a couple of comments and questions I'd like to also read out.
Okay.
Sister Faiza is saying, thank you so much, Sister Salatu, for this book. I relate to this book deeply, not only thinking of losing a loved one, but also moving on from a toxic relationship or marriage, moving on from a friendship you valued, moving on from a job you loved. How much time do you need to move on? Should there be a timeline when it comes to moving on? Because honestly, it's mostly difficult. This is her comment.
Yeah. How much time? That's another key question. When should you stop grieving? I think I said earlier, like, let's not even talk about stopping grieving. As long as you value something, there's always going to be that grief with you. It will just become dull with time, no longer in the foreground, less raw, not so easily reachable and triggered by stuff, but it will always be with you. When should you then move on? When you are ready to move on, then you are ready. That is the time to move on. Sister Aziza, you said something earlier where you said, really check your energy levels. That's also a sign. Can you actually envisage doing this? Can you picture moving on from whatever it is? When you start being able to even envisage that, then you are ready to take that one step. We can't put a timeline on it. We shouldn't. It's even so really stressful putting a timeline on it. What I know for certain is nobody should stay grieving non-stop. I think it's almost impossible. Even time will deal with it. But there are things we could do to help us heal faster, to help us get to the point where we have enough emotional energy, psychological energy, mental strength to want to move forward. And those are some of the things that we've shared so far, that I've talked about so far in the book. Then there are things we do that tie us down, that drain us even more. And one of these things is rushing to move on. It's counterproductive. Or saying by now, I should be over this by now. There is no should be. Just how am I feeling today? How am I feeling right now? What can I do to help myself feel stronger, feel better, feel more at peace? And one of the things is that refusing to do anything major. When you are dealing with the pain already of something major, don't add the stress by trying to make certain major decisions. So sometimes you find someone has just lost somebody, or they've just lost a job, or they've just broken a relationship, and people instantly want to tell them, well, go and do the next thing. I would say, no, catch your breath. Catch your breath, take stock, check yourself inside. How are you feeling? How are you doing? And then decide, am I ready for a next step? Sometimes the moving on is a tiny, tiny step, not even the whole thing. It's a tiny, tiny step. For instance, someone who's widowed, male or female, or who broke off a relationship or got divorced. When should they remarry? When they're ready to deal with marriage and all that comes with it. So for them, a small step might even be to accept starting a conversation with a suitor, promising nothing, dreaming of nothing, but let me even start a conversation. That's a tiny, tiny step. And for some people, they are not ready, so no rush, sincerely.
Here for that. Some more comments. The book brings a lot of different things to support one in one place. Looking forward to reading it. Thank you, dearest sister. This is from Sister Nagiba. Thank you so much. Brother Muhammad Usman is saying this talk is quite inspiring and you did really excellent presentation. I would like to suggest that most of the times we need to begin by counseling or preparing our kids to learn how to manage grief. We must find a way of selling the idea to them that in life, amongst many hurdles and milestones, there lies a big full stop to life itself. It might happen to anybody in the family, and it does happen to others out there. We really need to be preparing the minds of our young ones how to face and manage this oft-happening destruction. At the same time, we have to explain what Islam provides for this calamity whenever it strikes, like perseverance, submissions, patience, praying, and thanksgiving to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When Ibrahim, the son of the Prophet, peace upon him, died, he said, the eyes cry and the heart grieves, but we will never utter except that which pleases our Lord. There are quite a number of things we need to inculcate into our kids before they grow so that emotions won't lend them into the dangers of losing their faith. That's a very valid point. What would you add to that, Sister Salatu, that comment?
I'd add that the point he makes about preparing our kids, our families, is valid. Even as he says so, as we were reading it out, I found myself saying, okay, I don't think that's a conversation that we've had properly, even with our kids at home. Yes, we've talked about many things, we've brushed some of these things, but I think, yes, I would totally agree with that. Because sometimes when you're under pressure, what's inside of you, as they say, comes out. Grief puts you under pressure. What's inside is going to pop out. I know for sure the verses that I quoted in the book, some I came to know about them after I lost my husband. Some I knew of them before. I knew them, I accepted them, I understood them. But after he died, they took on new meaning for me. They came strongly, like they just came strongly to the top of my mind, to the surface of my mind. For example, shortly after I got the news that he had passed, and I was thinking, how do I deal with this? What do I do? What do I do? I did adhkar, I made dua, I would cry, then stop, then cry, then stop. And I kept thinking, what do I do? I then thought, let me go do 2 rak'ah nafila salah. And many times people kept saying, what made you do that? What brought it to your mind? And I kept saying, I don't know. It came to my mind as I kept thinking, what should I do? What should I do? What should I do? But recently, funny enough, as I was thinking about this particular webinar, I kept saying, what could have brought that to my mind? And I remember that I did find the verse in Surah Al-Baqarah where Allah says, "Wasta'inu bis-sabri was-salah," seek help with patience, patient perseverance, and salah. The first time I saw it years and years and years ago, I was struck by it. And I remember pausing and looking at it and thinking about it. Okay, so here are 2 things to do if you're in a fix. Of course, I didn't think about bereavements then. Just if you're in a fix, you stay strong, you keep striving, but you make sure you go do some act of worship. That should help connect with God. He'll back you up. So even though now I can't remember what thoughts sparked that performed 2 rak'ah nafila after my husband passed, and it was really helpful for me to do that, I do believe that it was because deep within myself, I had internalized that this is what you do when you are in a really tough situation and you can't think of anything else to do. Or if you can think of 100 things to do, but make sure you do this one as well. So whatever it is we teach, just as that participants shared with our kids now, even if they don't ever picture losing one of us, inshallah, when they face a tough situation, the pressure will force that knowledge to come back to the surface, and inshallah it will kick in and help them.
It's a very valid comment. Thank you so much, sister. I mean, I'm thinking of this just generally as a culture being more open about these things. I mean, it doesn't necessarily ever make you ready or make things easier, but it's just a bit more preparedness, if one can ever be prepared. There's some things you can never, but a little bit, just being aware of the reality. The awareness of the reality maybe enables acceptance, and it supports acceptance, even if it's still going to be challenging,
Yeah, especially that point of you are never really fully prepared for the event, but when the event then squeezes you, that thing you already said, okay, I understand this is what needs to happen. It's going to pop out. I mean, I have examples I even put in the book. When my late husband, for several months, would always in Subhi, Salah, when we're praying together, he would recite that verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah says, surely we will test you with the loss of the things you love. And he would recite it, and I would listen. And even though I don't speak Arabic, but I recognize which ayah it was, and I would let it like run through me, run right through me. This was after we lost our son, which I think is probably the inspiration for him. He became attached to that verse. When he passed away, and I was asking myself, so what do I do now? Let me go tell him that something bad has happened. And I remember, okay, no, he's the one who died. That's the thing that happened. I can't tell him. At a point I said, okay, so what would he have told you if he could talk to you right now? And I said, one of the things I remember thinking was he would probably recite that ayah to me. He would probably say, remember, Allah already said it in the book. So that helped. And speaking to this point also, if we remember the narration, after the Prophet, peace be upon him, died, when Umar ibn al-Khattab first went with what we call denial, like he's not dead, he's just done like Musa alayhi salam. He's gone to meet Allah, he'll be back soon. And when some people kept saying he was dead, then Umar ibn al-Khattab threatened, whoever says the Prophet, peace be upon him, is dead, he's going to be dead too. I'm rephrasing here, but that was what he was saying basically. Then Abu Bakr, peace be upon him, came out from the house and said, if you worship Muhammad, no, he's dead. If you worship Allah, he lives forever. Then he recited a verse from Surah Ali Imran, that's chapter 3, I think verse 144 or 145, where Allah mentions that Muhammad is no more than a messenger. Other messengers have passed away. If he dies or if he is killed, would you turn your backs and run off? And Umar ibn al-Khattab, narrating that event, said it was as though he was hearing that verse for the first time. He was acknowledging that, I forgot it. Thank you, Staziza, yes, 144. He was saying, I forgot, basically. I forgot it in that moment of grief. But all I needed was for somebody to say it, and it came rushing back. So the point you make is correct. Acceptance would probably be easier once they have this, that they accepted before the weight came, inshallah.
Yeah. Before we take a couple more comments, and then last questions to round up is, I think, in our tradition, it says, I mean, the Prophet remembered death regularly, and in terms of spiritual development and improvement, it's something that is recommended, for us to be alert and aware, because it's reality, and it will affect how you behave, and it will affect your perspective, and it will affect whether you think, really, at the end of the day, I'm going to meet my Lord. Is this really worth it? Is this really worth spending my time doing? It gives you perspective. But at the same time, if we were to remember it every second, we would be paralyzed, because this is such a big event. It is so there's that balance between remembering, but also managing yourself in the dunya and getting on, because the thought of it is very overwhelming. It is a dramatic event, So, but there was a saying by a wise person, which I read, which I quite liked, how it said, the wise person does three things. He doesn't attach himself. He leaves this life before he leaves. Just that gentle balance and dance between not being too attached to dunya, in the dunya, but you kind of give it, you just think this is dunya, from time to time people are sucked in by the stress of dunya, but which is what our salat is about, recentering yourself out of the vortex of the dunya and recognizing that this is just the dunya, it's a phase, it's a short journey. Don't get too carried away with it, and seeing. So that was one of the things they were saying. So, detach before you detach. The other thing was preparing their grave before they enter it via good deeds, via remembrance of Allah, via reciting the Quran, via implementing the principles of Quran, via, memorizing, etc. I know actually really, really manifesting, trying to be like the Prophet was the walking Quran. And the third thing was, trying to please your Creator. Obeying Allah and remembering Allah, being grateful to Allah. And I thought, okay, I suppose as Muslims, I mean, I think realities are never easy, but I think when we have this frame of mind, it just helps us. It's comfort, and there's somewhere to go. I'll just comment on a few more before I go to closing questions and points. There's quite a really interesting point somebody said. It says here, okay, Sheikh Nuruddin saying bewailing, according to some scholars based on a hadith, it may hurt the feelings of the dead that others are wailing or doing wrong on account of them, but not that they are punished for the wrongs or mistakes of others. Yeah. The Quran is clear that no bearer of burdens will bear the burden of another. Quran, chapter 74, verse 38. Thank you so much, Sheikh Nuruddin, for that clarification. That is wonderful. Halima Jibril is saying, Jazakallah Salatu for helping us to navigate the realm of grief. Grief is inevitable in our lives, but it's an unusual topic for a book. I read it from cover to cover the moment I received a copy. It's as captivating as it is instructive and empowering. This book has indeed provided a roadmap to recovery for all of those who grieve. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Sakina has said, said, sharing a research paper that came to mind as we discussed crying and the power of tears, the cry in the Holy Quran and the effect on the human behavior by Dr. Mohammed Mahmoud Al-Domi, Associate Professor in Quranic Tafsir from Jordan. So she's posted a link for people who want to pursue that. So please copy the link. If you want to keep researching, Jazakallah khair for that, sister. And I know there's a couple more comments that have come our way. Let's see, sorry. Okay, I think Sheikh Nuruddin has answered some of these points. So it's about the crying, etc., and the wailing. So I won't comment on those, but thank you so much for your input. I'm going down now. Okay, somebody's saying that they time difference and things like that, but they'll get the recording, inshallah. They just got the book when it was first released during COVID times, and at the time, as a hospital chaplain, it was so beneficial. This is a sister from New York saying to share the book with some of her patients. So, alhamdulillah, this is one of the things I was thinking as you were talking, how I was saying, why did you write the book? Because I was thinking how beneficial it is to share one's personal experience, but how challenging it can be to share one's personal experience. You know, yeah. I think also even culturally as West Africans, sometimes we kind of, you know, I know I'm generalizing, but sometimes we keep things to ourselves, we're very private. But it's also wonderful to share things that are beneficial with the intention of benefiting others, you know. Yeah. And then I think one of the last points before the last question, okay, this is clarifying again about the wailing, etc. I think one of the last points I'll make before we have some closing remarks is if you can speak to us about your relationship with Allah during this process and finding solace in Allah, in how that develops, you know, as a result of this process.
Okay. Let's say it's the process. It sends me on a quest. I think that's a way of putting it. Because after it happened, I really was asking myself all over again, so how does one communicate with the dead? Because, you know, the shock of it, that the person is gone, like gone, that's it, I didn't see this coming kind of thing. So there was that wish to communicate. And I became curious. And I wondered, what else does Islam say about the dead, the afterlife, what's going on, what's happening? Because it was like wanting to still be connected with, you know, the one who's passed on. We all feel that once you lose someone, you want to stay connected. And I remember also thinking that, you know, I used to see these people, mediums, and they would speak with the dead. Is that real? So there was a quest that came up in my head all by myself. And I then fell back on a habit that was an old one, which is go check the Quran, go check the Hadith, what's there. So in a sense, the quest that came up led me back to where I was before it all happened, which was I would go to the Quran and hope to find answers. In my understanding and growth through Islam, that was always my go-to place. It's check the Quran. What do you see? Is there something that answers a question in your head? And then came across this beautiful hadith, the one about the angels take news to the one who has passed on about their loved ones, and they ask, what are they doing? And if the news is good, then they are happy. And if it's not, then they make dua. And instantly, I know that gave me relief. And I checked again, and this is real, it's happening. he's getting news about me, about our son. So it no longer felt so broken off, so distant, so cold. Another thing about that quest was the images that then I could have in my head were not the kinds that were traumatizing, because they are, like I said, there are things that could make our pain worse and things that could make our pain better. He died in a car accident. I've never wanted to picture what that must be like. I know I used to have flashes where I would imagine that I was in the car with him and I could actually see this other car bearing down on us. That was really very hard for me. So having instead an image of, he's fine, inshallah, he's even getting news, even asking how is so and so, how is so and so. It was a better image, like someone who just traveled and wants to hear what's going on over there. The image I also got, coincidentally, as I was doing all that search, was when children die in infancy, they are still in that state of fitra, of innocence. The purity of their souls is still all there. They've not been touched by the world or shaitan or anything of the sort. What Allah does is he puts them with Ibrahim alayhi salam in a garden. And we get this from the hadith of the night journey that the Prophet, peace be upon him, made. So instead of a baby in distress who died at birth, I have an image of a baby who's happy, who's playing with other babies, and he's with one of our most respected and well-known prophets, Ibrahim alayhi salam, just waiting for us. So when you asked the question, relationship with Allah, I think it made me turn to him more, made me trust in his words more, because he had answers for me in the Quran and through the words of his prophet. I also feel it helped me reevaluate where Allah needs to be in my hierarchy of things that matter, of what matters. My relationship with my family matters, yes. With friends, yes. But the relationship with Allah is first. And if there's anything I would do that would break that or pull me away from that, including how I grieve, how I act, the choices I make because I'm grieving, I would then strive harder to maintain that relationship. So even for people who are dealing with other forms of pain and grief, the pain is a way of saying, where do you place this? Like I said, you feel the pain because how much you value that thing. Is there something or someone you value more than that thing? And this process forced me, or should I say helped me, reevaluate all that and sort out my priorities in my head, and then work out how to translate that prioritization into full action. So I wouldn't say, okay, I'm not going to perform Salah because I'm feeling really bad right now. No, I should definitely go perform Salah because I'm feeling really bad right now. There is a way to restructure things. It doesn't mean I'm not claiming any level of Iman or Taqwa or anything. That's why I use the word, the process helped me, because it helped me say where do these things need to be. I dare say that as the pain receded and became less raw, that sense of closeness also reduced. So I have had to work over the years to try and maintain something of that. But I also acknowledge it can never be like that, because in that one I was reminded of my sheer helplessness. That's one thing that grief could help you do, humble you and help you understand you don't really control anything except that little thing of, so how do I deal with this right now? And when you even acknowledge I don't control anything, some of the fear of the unknown starts to reduce. Because at a point I said, what if I had to deal with deep grief, deep loss again? What do I do? And I said, okay, we are asked to pray for what's good. We are asked to trust in God. He'll give us what's good for us. We are asked to always ask for the best things. So I pray, I ask for the best things, but I don't dwell in fear. At least I try not to dwell in any fear of what else is there, because the acceptance is I don't control anything. And if something has come by and Allah has helped me deal with it, alhamdulillah, then you move forward with that faith and you keep trying to stay connected to Allah. It's a continuous journey, so I haven't even arrived anywhere. It just helped me focus, I think.
Jazakallah khair, Salatu. That has been, it's been such a wonderful, thank you for sharing your experience with us. Thank you for leaving us with a book that we can all learn from. Alhamdulillah, may Allah bless you for that. And lots of people are saying Jazakallah khair, inspiring. Alhamdulillah, may Allah bless you and all of us and guide all of us. And I posted the link to the book for those who don't have access. I know here we tried to give as many copies to people as we could, so a lot have read it in the book club. Alhamdulillah. Those that haven't, I really recommend you read it. It's a really good, mashallah. And I would like us to close with some dua, inshallah, if possible. Yes, that would be wonderful if we could close with some dua for yourself. But Salatu Sule, if you could just lead us in some dua, please. Thank you.
Me?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Allahumma lakal hamd wa lakal shukr. Ya Allah, we thank you for your grace upon us. We thank you for all the blessings you have given us. We thank you for all the blessings that we are hopeful we will receive from you. We ask you for guidance, for protection, for mercy. We ask you to help us through all forms of adversity, whatever they might be. We ask you to increase our iman, to grant us deep iman, to help us to understand even when things are difficult, to help us to stay strong and to persevere. We ask you, Ya Allah, for every blessing, every form of favor that you have in store for all of us. We ask for blessings upon those who have passed on. Ya Allah, grant them light, space, companionship in the hereafter. Forgive all their sins. Grant them reward. Grant them the highest place in paradise. And Ya Allah, we ask the same for ourselves, that when it's our time, you will help us return to you in the best of states, and you will receive us in the best of ways. We ask for blessings on Emmoa Foundation, on Sister Aziza, and everyone who worked to put this together. We ask you for blessings on all those who contributed, who through their comments have added to all of us, our learning, and for anyone who is hurting in some way, even if people do not know it. You are the best of those who grant comfort. You know all things, you see all things. We trust and we rely upon you for all your grace and mercy. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Ameen. Thank you very much, Sister Aziza, for inviting me.
You're welcome. Thank you for honoring us with your presence. May Allah bless you and everyone, inshallah. Thank you so much. The recording will be circulated. People have been asking, those who couldn't make it, those who have made it, want to listen again. It will be recorded to all those who registered. And you can also just email Emmoa Foundation if for some reason you were not registered. And I'm just putting the email address and you would like to receive the recording. As soon as it's ready, inshallah, we'll send it. Jazakallah khair. Thank you very, very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.